Welcome to Crossing Faith. I'm John Pinna, and today we have a really interesting guest, Mr. Michael Hirshorne, who's a motivational speaker, who's an author, podcaster, and today we had him to talk. We're trying to figure out a title for this, and it came across the wire. He said "Dawn of Peace," and the idea of thinking about this, how the self and moving into larger issues of like the global political issues and the pendulum of politics. So I appreciate you for coming on and sharing your subject matter expertise with us.
Well, I appreciate it, John. Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, we had an interesting conversation, pre-conversation about how an individual looks at things through different lenses and how they kind of perceive their reality, and so maybe you could just take a step into what is your outlook, your philosophy. How did you, what is it what is your philosophy around how an individual should be evolving and becoming their better self?
Okay, well, that's an excellent question. And I think what I would use as far as you use the word evolving, I like to use the word self-actualizing, because that's what I'm always thinking about. How can I self-actualize? There's been a lot of philosophers and thinkers and psychoanalysts who have studied this kind of topic for a long time. And what I try to do pretty much on a daily basis now is try to figure out. I run through the events of yesterday and then what I could have done better, what I could have done, paid more attention to, and see how I can improve those things. And it starts with thought and goes from thought to speech to action. And I'm constantly thinking about what things will serve me better. And it's funny because on the way home from work today, I gave you the title, but on the way home from work, I had this radical idea of why not talk about what it would require in order for, well, self-actualization, sure, but real change, to get things at least calmer, more in line with the way people want to live. And that is, it's a radical concept. But I thought to myself that the time really for radical change is now. It could not be better. Now is the time for radical change, but radical change requires radical thinking.
Well, why is now the time? Why is now the time?
Why is now the time? It's an excellent question. I think it's an obvious kind of question because things have been coming to a blistering. They've been going at a blistering pace as far as everything: technology, politics, geopolitical wars, especially today, of course, and all these things going on, country going against country, and dictatorships, and countries taking over, and all these things are occurring. I mentioned to you earlier in a previous conversation about could this be the rug being shaken out? Because people tend to panic in certain situations, especially when it comes to this type of thing, this type of activity, politics or otherwise, socioeconomic upheaval. These types of things occur, and they have occurred throughout the centuries. But could it be that it's a good thing? I don't mean that in literally. I mean, could it be a thing that would help us to self-actualize, to change in a good way? Because it's a radical way of thinking. And we also spoke about lenses. I think everybody tends to see themselves through a particular lens, and they tend to see their reality through a particular lens. And believe it or not, John, we're scared. Most of us were very afraid to take that lens off.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's we're the self is under siege, right? We have this the digital age. Everybody is isolated in their own, just by the game playing or whatever it is they're doing on their apps. Then you have this we have this larger sort of collective anxiety because of the geopolitical situation. Whether you're for Trump or against Trump doesn't matter, but there's a lot of anxiety when it comes to regime changes and all kinds of other stuff.
Absolutely.
Everybody's put on the spot. I think I was I was just watching the news and I was going through TikToks, right? I was maybe doom scrolling, and I get a lot of news. And one of the things that I saw was Jordan Peterson comes on and he goes, "You could put a tweet and you can reach 20 million people with your tweet." He goes, so imagine you could be, just acting a fool and you tweet something crazy and it goes to 20 million people. And then there's a result because as a result of that action. And so there's a tremendous amount of access to the world, but then there's also this tremendous amount of isolation because of technology. But then there's also isolation because you're talking about your geopolitical events, right? So,
Right.
we all know the backdrop of these different events that are happening in the world right now. Right now, we got Israel and Iran. Right now, who do you root for? And it's always like one or the other, for example, and it's like who deserves to live and who deserves to die, that type of thing. And so you have to take a position, but that can be isolating. And if you don't know who you are and what you're about, which is your that's what your enterprise is endeavors to do, is figuring out who you are, what you're about, and continuous improvement. We would say that in quality management systems, continue, right, correcting nonconformities.
Sure.
So is that a correct sort of characterization of what's going on and how your philosophy might apply to an individual to improve?
You're getting at it in a way. What I would kind of add to that, in a sense, is, like I said, it's very easy to jump on the bandwagon for a lot of these causes. I want to jump on the bandwagon for this cause, or I want to jump on the bandwagon for that cause. We have to ask ourselves, why are we doing what we're doing? What is it doing for us? And for the self in capital letters, not the small self, but
Right.
for the big self, the capital S self. What is it doing by jumping on that bandwagon? Are you really taking the knowledge from your barber, your next door neighbor, your taxi cab driver, and saying, well, what's your opinion? What do you think? And they say, well, I think this. So you're going to think that because the majority of people in your neighborhood might be thinking that way.
Right.
But did you really take the time to research what you're doing? Did you take the time to research if the information that your taxi cab driver had was legitimate, was verified, was taken from various accounts instead of just one particular perspective? We're very, very quick to jump on the bandwagon, to jump on a cause, maybe because we need a cause to jump on. Maybe because we feel, like you said, isolated. We feel alone. So let me jump on the bandwagon because these people are doing it. So maybe I should do it. I won't feel as lonely. I won't feel as left out. Well, that's baloney.
Right.
Take the time to research for yourselves before you jump on the bandwagon. And then when you have the facts, not what you think are the facts, but what are the facts? Then analyze it like you're analyzing a computer program. Put it in, analyze, and then something will spit out. But again, even with all of that research, you're still seeing things through a particular lens. And if you're not willing to take that lens off and put another one on, I happen to be Jewish. So I'm viewing my world, my reality through that perspective. Now, that being said, John, I can go to the buffet table. I can go to the buffet table and I'll see a number of different dishes. Some can be kosher, some could be non-kosher, whatever. I will take from that buffet table what I choose and only what I choose, not necessarily all the kosher foods. Although I should, in some circles, if I don't do that, I'm out of the loop. I'm out of the group. I don't belong. But I'm thinking from a different perspective. What if we took that concept and turned it on its ear? I'll eat kosher, but not because you tell me to, because it's in a rule book, but because I get a certain energy from doing it.
Right.
That's a radical shift in thinking. A radical shift in thinking. But if it does me good and it makes me feel good, why not do it? I can still be part of the group and yet part of I'm satisfying a bigger thing within myself.
Right.
I don't have
Maintaining
to be part of the group.
example, and that discipline allows you to feel not only closer to God, but closer to your traditions, but also healthier. And that's something that's very internal. Is that what you're kind of saying?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You've hit the nail on the head. It's something internal. Now, it is in some circles very important to be, it's great to self-actualize, and it's great to be, thinking about your decisions and various things. But it's also good to be part of the group. A perfect example in Judaism is they require a quorum, a minyan of 10 to actually pray with this quorum. And it's important. And it's important to me, but I study with a rabbi on Mondays. I study something called Tanya. It's a certain discipline within Judaism. And they talk about that type of thing, how it's important to study in the quorum. That's a perspective, and I respect it. I respect this rabbi. He's a friend of mine. He's not just a rabbi. I don't see him out on his high horse from a podium, preaching to me. He's more of a, what do you think about this? And we go back and forth, just like you and I are going back and forth. And we'll hash it out. We'll go one on one about, I don't really feel that that's a custom or a concept that I can internalize necessarily your
Right.
way. And he loves to hash it out with me.
Right.
So it is important for me. I'm kind of I don't want to say radical, but I kind of, like I said, I'll take from the buffet table most of the foods because I know it is, it's important for my wife and for myself to be kosher. When my kid comes home, we eat kosher. She wouldn't have it any other way. And I'm not going to just abandon that because, well, I have to be different and I have to be independent and I don't care it's my kid, man. It's my kid.
Right.
I'm not going to just disown them because they think a certain way and I don't.
Yeah.
That's an important value to me.
Well, it seems like you're trying to balance the individual and individual will with the integrating with tradition and integrating with the community with the larger whole. But there's somewhere in the middle where everyone has to find their own way and their path about where they're going to sit in how they're going to integrate or how they're going to interact with the world, where they are confident in who they are and what they're about, and also and how they interact with different situations. And what you're saying, at least from our previous conversations and the conversation we have now, is there's self growth comes from stepping outside of your comfort zone to interact with and to try to understand what's going on with the other.
Absolutely. Try to understand what's going on with the other.
Right.
But what if, John, another radical, see, we're using this word radical. What if we think about this in a radical way? What if the other was part of us, was part of the self with the big S,
Right.
which is all encompassing? We have this prayer in Judaism called the Shema,
Shalom.
right?
Okay.
The Shema, hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. Not that there is only one God, but God is one,
Yeah.
oneness. Okay, so I try to take that concept to heart. The
Yeah.
other is is part of me.
Right.
Why would I hit the other with a hammer when I really, in reality, am hitting some part of myself, the
Right.
bigger self? But why am I doing that? Well, because I believe, and this is an illusion, but I believe that the other is not me in any way, shape, or form, is not part of me, is not the other. Look, John, the other wants exactly what I want. Who
Right.
doesn't want security, comfort, empathy, love, uh, kindness? These are things that are inherent in all of us.
Sure. Yeah.
And it brings some very good questions to mind. We we're not thinking correctly. It's faulty thinking when we say, well, it's good for them, but that suits them. It doesn't suit me. To a degree, that's true. You don't have to take every food from the buffet. Just because they're doing something doesn't mean you're you should be doing something. But the bottom line still is, don't we all want the same things?
Sure.
Don't we all want peace?
Yeah.
Really, when we think about it, we all want, but we're going about it in different ways, and that's okay. There's a radical concept now of, it's not radical. It's been going on for thousands of years. Us Jews, we're waiting for Mashiach. We're waiting for I say we're waiting for the messianic age.
Right.
Okay, what's going to usher that in? Mashiach, maybe Messiah, whatever
Yeah.
word you want to use. Okay, but maybe Messiah is waiting for us to get our acts together, not the other way around. And how would they do that? Do you think they're just going to come in when all of this craziness, we call it chazarai. I'm teaching you some Yiddish here.
Right.
All right. Chazarai. It's craziness. It's
Yeah.
nuts. It's the Messiah's not coming. He's waiting.
Hazarai is like that in the belly. It's
In the bell, correct. Chazarai. So
like,
you're
so
an
it's,
honorary tribesman anyway.
yeah.
Okay. So because I know from before.
Yeah.
So Chazarai, it's with all this Chazarai between us and ourselves and the world, and everybody's acting crazy, and nobody is looking out for the other, right? Mashiach, in my opinion, is not going to come until we are ready, and we're able to get our acts together for ourselves. Now, I mentioned this concept of Mashiach, but also us Jews, we want to build the third Beis Hamikdash, the third temple, right? The third temple. So in the past, believe it or not, there were many people who went. We say it's all Jews, but anybody who really offered sacrifice would go to the temple in various quote unquote religions and various sects and very different people. Today we have, Reformed, Reconstructionists, conservative, all of they're still Jews. They all would have went to the temple back in the day if there were those sects. It was only just Orthodox, and gone to do whatever they wanted to do. Here's a radical concept for you. What if this temple, instead of pulling people apart, and the Jews do this, and the Catholics do this, and the Muslims are that, what if this temple was a temple for all religions?
Right.
What if it brought the whole world together? Because that seems to be the hotspot of the world anyway,
Sure.
in Jerusalem.
Right.
Look at this little piece of land, the size of New Jersey. The entire world is centered around that little piece of land these days. For what?
Well, it's
Why?
weird. People get caught in that in the theology and the theological, outlook of their faith. That's the problem.
Absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely. They get caught up in this thing. If they really do think about this little strip of land the size of New Jersey, then why not put the pedal to the metal, so to speak, when we build this temple and make it a temple for all religions? That's a radical concept, and it would require radical change. You would have to think about it differently. I, as a Jew, would have to think about it differently. Christians would have to think about it differently. Why couldn't that be a temple for all temples, a temple for the ages, a temple that would just be divinity, divine energy? That's what I'm all about, is the energy.
we're already there. The Muslims pray on Friday, the Jews it's Saturday, and the Christians it's Sunday. So it's already there. The schedule's
It's the
there,
weekend.
more or less. Yeah. So, and it's, but well, it's an interesting. You've been to Jerusalem, don't you have
Sure.
so, and so it's interesting to go there and see everything is still separate, very
It is.
separate.
It
It's
is.
it's very peculiar. I think a lot of people have a lot of pride in that. It was very peculiar for me. I was like, oh, and of course, the Armenian quarter and also the business. And I go, and I understand, like it's sexy to have your own space, and then there's different events, But the thing is that we're all Abrahamic, I'm not, and so as Abrahamic, that there's a unity. We say the same thing as that God is one. That that there's God is the supreme God, and God is one. We say the same thing in Islam, and so the challenge is that there's no. I mean, I shouldn't say there's no, but in Jerusalem, it seemed like you'd want to, instead of stay separate, there'd be an opportunity, like you're saying, to build the third temple. And is there anything theologically that says it can't be? It can't have access to other, like, to anybody who's Abrahamic?
As far as I know. I mean, why shouldn't it be sections? That you can go in there. There's a section. There's a section possibly for the Muslims where they would feel more comfortable, but it doesn't have to be a separate room. Maybe they congregate in a certain area, whatever. And Jews will congregate in another area. But the fact is that that to a lot of people, maybe if they're listening to this podcast and you're Orthodox, would be radically different, and they wouldn't accept it as anything but a crazy idea. But again, I'm going back to this original opening statement, which was radical change. We need radical change right now, but it requires a radical way of thinking. I mean, just for a second, if we just kind of ponder this idea, would it be such a bad thing to have all of the world's major religions, even if they're just the Abrahamic religions, come together to unify at that one spot instead of having X number of Jews, X number of Muslims, X number of Christians? You have a unity of peoples that gather in a holy divine spot that all of these religions at one time or another deemed holy, right?
Sure.
So Allah is supposed to ascend from the rock, dome of the rock, and ascend to heaven, whatever, or not. Allah,
Yeah.
Muhammad the prophet. You had Jesus who was overturning the tables and this is my father's temple. How dare you with the money changers and it all came from Judaism. I
Sure.
mean, he was Jewish, born Jewish, raised Jewish, died Jewish.
Right.
Christianity came a whole lot later, hundreds of years later. So bottom line is there is a point where you're going to maybe ask yourself, I'm going to ask myself, what will it take? What will it take to change my idea or the idea of unity? How do we arrive at peace? Will we ever see the day when peace will be at hand? Will we ever see the day when peace will be at hand? Is it a fantasy, or is it something that we can really think about as a reality?
Well, I think it's interesting for you to, when you mentioned, it's like we look at things where we have these themes, right? Where an Abrahamic faiths, Christianity and Islam are really sects of Judaism. To really,
Mhm.
that's
Mhm.
the thing I've said many times. I go,
Yes, they are.
and so they're really sects that come out of or birth from, and so I don't know, and like I said, I don't. Maybe this is a hate crime saying that, but is there any really difference between you have the Sephardic Jews, the Ashkenazi Jews, and then you have Christians, which they're broken from the book, right? They've broken away from the book, but then you got Muslims, which is really a Jewish Jesus, a Jewish Jesus movement, because we look at Hazadisa as a not the it was a Messiah that wasn't realized, and then we had to have the last prophet. It's all kind of there, the
It's
pieces,
all there. It's all there.
you know.
I mean, what about if we thought about it like this? I mentioned lens a few times. You've got different thicknesses of this lens. Maybe it's a very, very thin at one part, and then a Muslim will put it on, it'll be a little thicker at that same part. A Jew puts it on, it's much thicker, goes right to the middle. You're seeing the same thing I'm seeing, but the lens is changed somewhat.
Right.
Instead of halal, it's kosher. But you're going to eat kosher food.
Sure.
So it's the same thing if it was prepared that way. It's just a different way of seeing it. But here's the thing, we are, like I said before, we're hesitant, and not just hesitant. We're terrified. We're terrified of taking that lens off. How is it going to affect me? How is it going to affect my world if I invite, say, I don't know, a Reconstructionist Jew over to dinner?
Sure.
They would probably come, but how many Orthodox Jews would go to a Reconstructionist Jew for Shabbat meal on Friday night?
Sure. Yeah.
Not a whole lot.
Yeah.
Not a whole lot. Why? Because they wouldn't necessarily prepare kosher food. The house would be different. They'd be thinking about things from a different perspective. You might as well say it's two different religions. It's not. It's one religion.
Yeah.
But there's so many different variables that are involved. There's so many different levels. If you're Muslim, you're Muslim. You're a religious Muslim, or you're not a religious Muslim.
Right.
Christianity, they have different, Protestant and Baptist, and there's a lot of different levels there too.
Sure.
But the bottom line is, we're all cut from the same cloth. We
Right.
really
We all
are.
want the same things. We don't want to die. You know what I mean? We want comfort. We
Right.
want food. We want to raise our families. We want to do this,
Sure.
and it's all the same outlook as far as the, sort of the strategic goals. It's the tactical that we get caught up in. It's like, and so that's the part of the I think part of the problem. And you talk about this stuff like in the your when in your conversations in your book about sort of like the rigid outlook. You have a sort of a rigid outlook on how you look at the world, and so this you're in a lane, and so you're stuck in that lane. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how do you break out of that lane? How do you start to step away from the lens that you're into to get into another? Because it's difficult for people. It's not easy.
Right. I can kind of get that. I understand where you're coming from with that. But do you ever get up on a particular day and think to yourself, how much more of this can I take? How much more do I really want to absorb, to take, it's penetrating. The news today, if you really scroll, you called it doom scrolling. If you really scroll, if you do that on a daily basis and you wake up doing that and you go to bed doing that and you think about what's really going on around you, it could drive you completely insane. And the way you get out of that lane is to stop doing that, is to put your mind on what it is you do want instead of what you don't. I got to tell you, John, I'm just as guilty as everybody else, only because I have kids over there right now. And to me, I have a completely different perspective than to someone who doesn't have children over there.
Right.
And when I hear certain things about certain people saying certain things about the Israelis and the doom, and what they're doing versus I get, it's very difficult to step away from my human reaction and go to this Michael Hirshorne spiritual thing. Man, you talk about, when my kids are in danger, I'm gonna go crazy
All
on them.
bets are off because it's you're not only it's a personal thing, but there's and I know you have family over there. It's difficult when you're once there's when it's personal. It's easy to sort of armchair,
Exactly.
you know.
Exactly.
I'd be like,
So
wow, it's fine because I don't have any family in Israel right now. I have family in Afghanistan though,
yeah,
so it's like it's difficult because you're trying to figure you want to be magnanimous about things, but it's
right.
very very difficult when
Very difficult.
directly
Very difficult. I mean, it's you hear all this stuff going on, and if you get caught up in the postings, like for Facebook and Instagram, I read some of this stuff and I'm like, these are morons. How can you say that? It's completely untrue. And it goes back to not doing the work for yourself. It goes back to not thinking for yourself. Why? Because thinking is hard, John. Thinking is hard. Reacting is easy. Reacting is easy. Jumping on a bandwagon is easy and it's fun. People love to jump on a bandwagon. They love to jump on a cause. But do they even think about what they're jumping on that cause for? Do they even know why they're jumping on it? It could just be for fun, for kicks, because they're lonely. I don't know. I don't really care. I try not to do that. I can sometimes get caught up in that rah rah camaraderie, blah, 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 we're number one, and blah, 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 blah. But I try to take sometimes, just take a step back and say, wait a minute, whoa, 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 whoa. Is this the right thing to do? Is this going to take me towards self-actualization? Is it going to be good for the self, the larger self? Is what I'm about to think, say, or do going to serve me or my purpose, what I'm all about? Because what I'm all about right now is just how can I be better than I was yesterday? And you know what? I'll tell you one other thing. At the end of the line, when I'm 90 or 100 or God willing 126 and set a record, can I look back and smile? Can I look back and smile? If I can keep those words in my head from the minute I get up to the minute I go to sleep, can I look back and smile when I'm 126? That could carry me through my whole day. Those actions that I'm about to say, whether it's washing my hands or it's saying a prayer before I eat, it's taking the onus away from gobbling my food down just so I could self-serve and satisfy myself, and putting it towards a higher purpose. That's what a prayer before we eat is for.
Right.
It's to actually get something out of that food, to bring it, to elevate it, to bring it to a higher level, so that I can what self-actualize, serve humanity, serve myself, become a better human being. Sure, I can put it in my mouth because it's pleasurable, but what is that really doing?
Right.
It's certainly not elevating it.
Sure.
So yes, when I look back at 120, there was a book by a Russian author. I'm trying to think of the name now. Uh, Tolstoy wrote this story of the life and times of
Ivan.
Ulich, something Ulich.
Yeah. I
Uh,
mean, Ilyich. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Ilyich, whatever. And the end of the story was so powerful for me because I remember Wayne Dyer. I loved Wayne Dyer. I listened to him all the time. He was one of those gurus, self-actualization guys. And he said, Ilyich looked up at his wife on his deathbed. And, she wanted to get the most out of life, so she married this doctor, this big macha, big
Yeah.
shot. Macha is big
Yeah.
shot.
Back. Yeah.
Big doctor. I want the money, I want the fame, I want the power, I want it all, and you can give it to me, Mister Husband.
Yeah.
And for many years he treated his wife with kid gloves, and he was kind to her, and no matter how she treated him, he was kind to her. And on his deathbed, he looks up at her, and he says, "What if my whole life was a mistake?" And he died. He died right after that. What if my whole life was a mistake? John, I am not going to say that on my deathbed. I know for a fact I'm not going to say that on my deathbed. Why? Because if I'm thinking every day that at the end of my life, can I look back and smile? My actions will be in alignment with my thoughts. And
Right.
I will try hard. I'm not saying I'm perfect. I'm not saying I'm even close to perfect. But the fact is that if I'm trying to do that, yeah, I'll take a few steps back. I'm human like anybody else. I can react. I will react. I do react when I'm not supposed to, quote unquote supposed to. What are we really supposed to do? But fact is that I will take a few steps back, but then I'll ponder it.
How
How
do
do
you
I
how,
improve that?
how do you balance something like your kids are in Israel right now? You're worried. How, you could be doom scrolling right now. You could just be going on. How do you balance something like that weighs heavy with your philosophy of not reacting and
Okay.
self improvement? I mean, that how do you what's going on with that with you right now that allows you to have some sort of peace of mind and still you know be who you are and what you're about, this self improvement and evolving towards a more positive existence.
Well, that's another excellent question. You keep asking excellent questions. I think about what it is that I do want. What is it that I do want? Not focus on what it is that I don't want. What I don't want is my kids to be injured or, God forbid, worse. What I don't want is to have the war that's going on over there in the Middle East become even worse, or something really radical to happen, or Iran to do something really, 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 really stupid, so that Israel will have to respond in a way that the world will not like. I think about what it is that I choose for myself and my family, and I try to concentrate on that. And here's the really radical part. Not only do I think about that, but I'm thankful to my God, Hashem, Allah, whatever, however you relate to divinity. I'm thankful in advance for that reality. And not only that, but I feel that reality as my reality. I feel it as though it's happening now. Because you know what? Now is all we got, baby. Right now is all we got. The past is gone. It's history. The future is a mystery. All I have is now. And this is the eternal moment of now. Because in the metaphysical world, all things are happening right now. The
Right.
past, present, and future are all happening on a space-time continuum now. In God's world, that's what's going on.
Right.
Okay. He's seeing all things. She's seeing, it's seeing, God's, well, I don't care what you call God. Okay. How
Right.
you relate to God. But God is seeing all this happening at once because that's all there is in that metaphysical time space. And really the reality of it is that's what we're living in. I'm gonna delve off a little bit into quantum mechanics here
Sure.
because people have to understand it from a metaphysical perspective, which brings to mind something that I've been studying for quite some time, and not just metaphysics, but quantum mechanics and quantum physics.
Okay.
You see, and I mentioned before that we're living in an illusion, which we are, and I'll tell you why. Because if you look at the atom is what? Protons, neutrons, and electrons. In the center is the nucleus, which is protons and neutrons.
Yeah.
It's rotating around, the electrons are rotating around that nucleus in orbit.
Sure.
Okay. But between the nucleus and the electrons rotating in orbit is a lot of space, emptiness, just 99.9% space
Yeah.
on the quantum level. But the variant, really, if you compare it as an analogy, you compare that to the physical world, you would have the sun and Pluto as an electron rotating around the sun. That's the difference in space. That's why I said 99.9% space. That's the atom. That's the physical matter. That's what we're made of, atoms. So if we're 99% space, okay, what's the other 1%? Well, you got the protons, the neutrons, and the electrons. What are they made of? They're made of frequencies, energy. They're made of wisps, of nothingness. So non-physical comprises physical. That does not make sense. The only reason, John, when you knock on your table in front of you, the only reason why you believe it's solid, quote unquote, is because the reality is it's pushing back. The electrons in your hand are pushing back on the electrons in the table. So two negative forces net out to another force. So it's a pushback. It appears solid, but the reality of it is you've got two opposing forces and they're pushing against each other. If you could take all the electrons out of your hand temporarily
Sure.
and up to your wrist, so your hand contains no electrons, it just contains protons and neutrons. You could literally put your hand up to your wrist into the table, no problem. Pull it back out, put the electrons back in. There you have it.
Right.
So that's telling me that the table is not solid. We only believe that it's solid. Just as if I look at my window right now, the sun is setting. Should
Sure.
be close. Now it's only 6 o'clock, but in another hour and a half, 2 hours, the sun's going to be setting. Well, that's bullshit. Pardon my French. It's not setting. The sun is in its place. It's not moving. It's the earth that's moving away from the sun, and it gives us the appearance of a sunset. So all of this is illusory. Just as though you and me and the table, we all believe we're separate from each other. But if there's space and energy, just space and energy, then there's nothing there.
Right.
It's thought, it's consciousness. That's all really everything is. We're in the matrix, literally in the matrix, as consciousness.
Well, so isn't it easy when you're looking at that, when you have that outlook, to kind of then take a step back and say none of it matters?
Yes, it is. It is very easy to say none of it matters. And you could say that. But here's the reality. You're living in the physical dimension, in the physical world. In the physical dimension, you play by physical rules.
Right. My sister will say we're in the matrix, and she goes down a really strong metaphysical path. And my answer to her was always, well, that might be true, but I still got to pay my bills. I still have a
Wait,
practical. I
there's,
got to put my
there's,
pants on. I still got to,
okay,
you know what I mean?
I, I do.
And so the challenge is that we've kind of gone. It's strange and divergent paths. So I'm very faithful, and I have, but I delve into the theoretical physics and all this other good stuff. But I've had a sort of a career down this path. My sister, she went to the music industry. She's an artist. She goes down that, and she's got a potpourri of fades, in her life, that type of thing. And she sort of delves in back. And it's an interesting philosophy because I go, well, you still have to do, there's still things you have to do. And because you live in this observable world, even though like I said, the theoretical physics is a hobby of mine, and I talk about black holes and the tennis racket effect and all this other stuff. The
Fractals.
reality is that we're kind of stuck with what we're with the environment that we're in, and like trying to figure out how can we how can we perform. And of course, you could turn around and say it's just a matrix. Nobody, I'm not going to save any money. I'm not going to work towards retirement. I'm not going to do these things. And
Didn't say I did not say that.
I know I'm just saying you can if you turn around and say it's all an illusion, and then you're just carpe dieming it every day. You're living.
You could, but does that mean that the cop is not going to stop you if you're going 95 miles an hour and give you a ticket? You're
That
still
was the
going to get
question.
that ticket.
Balance that. How do you balance the philosophy of the illusion with the practical?
Perfect question. Here's the answer to that question. You know that it's an illusion. You dance in the rain. You dance in the illusion, knowing the whole time that it's still an illusion. I met an author named Anita Morjani. I told you this before.
Yeah.
And she talked about what death was actually like because she supposedly died. And she went through the whole death process. And she said in the death process, there's no synagogues or mosques or churches. It's oneness. It's wholeness. It's simply energy. You become one with the oneness. You become one with the oneness. And it's like, she finally wakes up to the fact that it's almost as if you're asleep this whole time, and when you die you're born, and then you wake up from this dream. Can you say Alice in Wonderland? Okay.
Yeah.
So you're sleeping the whole time in this physical reality,
Sure.
knowing that it's an illusion, and you wake up when you die. I mentioned Conversations with God, the book,
Yeah.
the series of books, and they asked the question, or Neil Donald Walsh says, "Okay, so what? So what? So it's an illusion. So what? So what happens after you die?" And God says, "What do you think happens?" He goes, "I don't know. I asked you." He goes, "You go on living.
Yeah.
You go on living as if nothing really happened, and for a while you don't even know you're dead. You have to kind of think about what is this reality now? You wake up to a new reality. It's like life was a birth and birth was a death. Or excuse me, birth was a death and death was a birth,
Right.
vice versa, whatever. It's very, very strange, but the fact is that energy has no boundaries. If we're truly energy, there are no boundaries. There really aren't. I am my brother's keeper, literally, not figuratively, but literally.
Yeah.
I mentioned before the example of the ocean.
Yeah.
We imagine ourselves as separate from, and I gave this example of, you have a glass, and you dip the glass in the ocean, and you look at this glass, and it's cloudy, it kind of looks like ocean water, it smells like ocean water. No, 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 it doesn't look like ocean water. It is ocean water. If you took the glass, you do it all the way down, a mile down, you're still going to get the same ocean water. You go a mile up, it's ocean water. In between, ocean water. Everything is ocean water. It's all the ocean. You put that glass on the shore, and it feels, if it had consciousness, and it does, because everything has some consciousness, some energy to it. It feels as though it's alone. It's other than. It's different than. It serves whatever function it serves. It doesn't even know what function it serves, but it certainly isn't the ocean. It's a glass of ocean water.
Right.
That's true. Okay. That's maybe living in the illusion. You have to live in that glass of ocean water because, like you said, that's the physical reality. That's the reality of your situation. You're inside the glass as ocean water. All
Right.
right. But when someone comes along and picks up the glass and pours it back into its source, let's mention that, we'll put that word in bold.
Right.
Where does it come from? Its father, its source. Okay. It becomes, for all intents and purposes, not like the ocean, but the ocean
Right.
itself. It cannot distinguish itself from the ocean. Couldn't we, another radical change here, radical shift in thinking, couldn't we be that glass of ocean water as physical human beings while we're living, quote unquote, living,
Yeah.
But when we're poured back into the source, we become the source.
Yeah. Is this the you mentioned it a word back in the when we were speaking actus? Is that what you're talking?
Actus.
Yeah.
Yes, actus. Actus is unity. Very, very good. I'm glad you remembered that, John. That is what I spoke about in Israel when I was there. I was at the base of Masada, and it was a beautiful starry night. And we had a fire lit, and we were singing, and we had such spirit and such unity. And compared to these guys that I was with, I was a peon like you wouldn't believe. Like I don't have the knowledge base that they have in the law and halacha they know 10 times what I know. And the rabbi looks at me, he goes, "You're on." And I had to speak. I had something prepared just in case he said that. But I gave a speech, and at the end, they looked at me and they were like, "Where in the world did that come from?"
Hmm.
And I was like, "From here, man, right from here." And I used Achdus a lot. I used the example of the ocean, and I used the example of a jigsaw puzzle, how each piece is interlocked into the next piece, how each piece is different from the next piece, but that it's required in order for the jigsaw puzzle to be whole. Because one piece out of the 10 times 10 times 10 to the 10 trillionth power number of pieces that we are as the universe, if one piece is missing, is the universe whole? And the answer, of course, is no. So we need each of those pieces.
Right.
The Muslims and the Hindus and the Jews. There's nothing wrong with having diversity.
Yeah.
Okay? Because if God is diverse, if God is everything and God is everywhere, then why can't we be everything, part of that matrix, part of that whole, and still be interlocked together as one, as our separate units, our separate pieces? Sure, some pieces are bigger than other pieces, but they still serve a purpose. The smaller pieces still need to be there in order for the whole to be whole.
Yeah.
They're not less powerful. They're just other than. One's bigger, one's smaller.
Yeah, when I teach at the college level, I always used to say, I'm doling out these pieces of the puzzle. Hopefully, you start to put the puzzle together and start to see the general theme of the class. You know what I mean? Like,
Sure.
and of
Sure.
course, finite because it's a particular subject matter, of whatever it is. But then there's people that aren't putting the puzzle together.
So some people, will go through their whole lives. Look, sometimes it's a good thing you said that, because sometimes, you get a little tap on the wrist. You know what I mean? And you don't pay attention to it, and then you get a shake, and you don't pay attention to the shake. And if divine intelligence, God, Allah, whatever you think of it as, if you still don't react to the shake, you get knocked down. You get knocked down. On December 24th of 2018, I didn't listen to the tap on the wrist. I didn't listen to the shake, and I got knocked down. I didn't get knocked out, but I got knocked down. And my jaw was broken, and I was in pain and in agony for over a year. Now, I'm making an analogy here. I didn't literally get a broken jaw.
Right.
But as far as I was concerned, I was out of it, man. I was done. I was toast. I had 30 years as an accountant, and I couldn't take another day, not another day. And I told my office mate, "I'm about to go to the hospital because I can't take another day of this. I'm going to have a nervous breakdown if I don't leave."
Right.
And I had to take some time off, a long time, and I never went back to that job. And I started this journey long before that. I was getting hits, little pulses, little hits, license plates, numbers, things. I was just, getting hits, and I paid attention to them, but not enough. I didn't pay enough attention. And one day I got this spam message that said, "When everything looks like it's falling apart is when it's finally coming together." Finally. And I didn't pay attention to it. And I went through a year and a half of struggle, financial struggle, physical struggle, mental struggle. I was a mess. It took almost 2 years to come back from that. And finally we did, and we're doing, thank God, okay. I got a book out. audiobook, songs, website development, various projects I'm going through, life coaching certification, and various things. Not tooting my horn, just telling you, for the listeners out there who are like, man, that's a great story, but it's not me. I just can't find my way out of this.
But you're also not a young buck.
I'm not a young buck,
I mean,
and I started all this in my 50s,
yeah.
in
So,
my late 50s, or mid 50s. My grandmother went back to school at 50 years old. She went back to school to learn how to become a real estate agent. She became the best in her field, and went into real estate at 50. It's never too late to do that. I'm finally, when I get up in the morning. Did you ever see that Jerry Maguire? Did you ever see Jerry Maguire, the movie?
yeah.
With the guy who keeps coming in and out of the flick, and he goes, "I wake up in the morning and I clap my hands together and I'm ready for that." I I I laugh about it, but I feel like that guy. When I wake up, I feel passionate about my day. And what am I doing? I'm a gastroenterology administrator. It's not such a grandiose title, but I find myself like I'm actually helping people and I'm enjoying it. And when I get home, I get to do really cool things like this,
Right.
and talk to other people about their situations. I have not figuratively, literally saved several lives, physically and mentally. And I'm really proud of that. There was one woman who was suicidal. I talked to her for every day for almost a year and a half, and we got her back on track along with her therapists. But I gave her a lot of good advice, and we talked almost daily. She read my book, Taking a Chance on Life, loved it. There's a lot of good stuff in there as far as, you mentioned, well, how do you do that? How do you get out of the matrix? How do you take the lens off? One big thing I recommend is meditation. Meditation is huge. I used to do it every day. I still kind of do it, but not to the degree that I used to, 45 minutes at a time. I don't have the time to do that because I'm at work at 6:30 in the morning. But when I come home, I wrap my tefillin. You know what tefillin is?
Yeah.
The phylacteries. Okay, so I wrapped the tefillin. I never used to. This is very odd for me because I started doing this. I asked this rabbi friend of mine to buy me a pair of tefillin in my late 50s. I think it was like maybe a year ago or 2 years ago, and I didn't have tefillin since I was 13. So you're talking between 13 and 58 is a long way. And I said, buy me a pair. He's like, you sure? I'm like, yeah. I dropped a lot of money.
Right.
And I started wearing. He goes, I dare you to wear these for just a week. See if you can do it. And I did it. And then after a week, I'm like, why not just push it to 10 days? And 10 days went to 2 weeks. I actually, I love wrapping it because after I do, I close my eyes and I meditate and I feel so connected. And isn't that really what we're all trying to do? The feeling of connection is what it's all about for everybody.
Right.
Connected to who? To divinity, to ourselves, to other human beings. Why is all this going on? It's
Yeah.
because we want to feel connected. We want to feel like we're part of something bigger than ourselves. But most of us aren't willing to put in the work, just like I said before. We're not willing to take off the lens. We're
Sure.
not willing to put somebody else's lens on. We're not willing to do the research. We're not willing to do the work because it's too easy to be in our funk and to stay there, sometimes for years, sometimes for lifetimes,
Yeah.
until we finally wake up.
It's difficult. Yeah. I think people, when you're talking about the life of Ivan Ilyich, it's like, what if it was all wrong, and you get to that point where you don't want to be looking back. People talk about regrets and all kinds of other stuff.
Oh my
You know,
God.
I
What
mean,
if it was all wrong?
yeah,
You know?
it's tough because if you don't, sometimes you got along on the ride and before you know it, it is all over. I mean, I can look at 3 points in my life where I made the wrong decision, but I made the right decision at that moment with the information I had. But it ended up being the wrong. And I always tell people, I say, well, I don't have any regrets because I kind of look back at those three elements and I say, yeah, it was terrible, it's tragic, but I got up and got through it.
Like,
And my parents, different generation. I'm sure, I'm sure your parents were in the same age group. They come from my parents are 85, they're still around, but they look at things very, very differently. They're about how things work and what's going on, because they came from a very sort of there were strange lanes in their lifetime, and there was ups and downs with wars and all kinds of other stuff. But I think that the challenge is that we're coming out on the top of the hour, so I wanted to kind of make sure that we got your message out to our listenership on, let's start off with we mentioned your book. What's your book, and then what's the message you like to get out to our listenership about, when it comes to, if you're in that spot, it's time, maybe you got the signs, but you haven't taken the opportunity yet. What do you do?
First of all, going back to question one, or what you said before, the book "Taking a Chance on Life" mentions a lot of things about my personal life experiences, about divinity, about all the challenges that I went through, and looking at life through a different perspective. That lens, I keep going back to the lens. It also has a huge amount of resources in it as far as where to go back. I keep going back to meditation. Meditation is huge for me, whether it's putting on tefillin or just meditating, in and of itself. That kind of connects me, and that's a real good starting point for people who are exploring this type of thing. You want to get into spirituality, you want to get, you're asking yourself, what is the meaning of life? All these, metaphysical questions, all these ethereal questions. You really need to decide that for yourself. But to me, what's really the most meaningful is connection. We want peace. Everyone wants peace. We all want whatever it is we want. We want the finer things in life. We want to feel that others are being kind to us. We want to feel empathy. You got to do the work, the internal work. It starts in here. Right in here. Start doing the work. Start looking at what's important to you, what serves you, what's meaningful to you. And if you can find something, if you make soup into deliciousness and that's your thing, that's your bag, do it if all you have time for is 10 minutes a day. You don't have to make a career of this, John. Do it for 10 minutes a day. And then eventually you'll be able to, if you can see yourself doing that, and that's really what all you can see and all you can think about. Eventually, there'll be a way open to, there'll be a way, a windows, a door, something will open, which will allow you to go through that door and you'll be on your way. Do it for just a little bit amount of time if you don't have enough time. Explore other avenues. Don't be so closed off. I have to do it this way because my mama told me to do it this way. Well, pay attention, be respectful to your mama to a degree, but when you go home, explore on your own. Okay, respect your parents. It's important to do that. But when you go home, you go to someplace else, do a little research. Research it for yourself. Do some reading. God forbid you do a little reading instead of doom scrolling, like you said before, because all you're seeing is somebody else's opinion of something. Read on your own. So important to, yes, how do you get out of your way? You got to get out of your own way. Do some research. Read the book, mine, others, whatever. I mentioned other resources. I mentioned Conversations with God. I mentioned Anita Morjani, Wayne Dyer, Carolyn Miss. I studied all these people for years before I came to the decision on my own that I really did want to self-actualize, and that it's important for me to do so. And of course, I want to promote my own book, but the fact is that there are a lot of things out there that will help you, and I'll mention them in the book so you can see it. Go on my website, heaveniswithin.com. Heaveniswithin.com. Huge. A lot of good stuff, meditations and videos and various things. I'm constantly adding stuff. I'm adding 2 videos. One's called The Dawn of Peace, and I mentioned peace as being very important to me. And one's called The Breath of God, which will be incredibly powerful videos that will knock your socks off. I talked to a guy today about it, very technically advanced. I'm not technical, but this guy's extremely technical. And we're working on producing these videos. They're going to be very powerful videos. Dawn of Peace and um, Breath of God.
Breath of God. Well, I appreciate you taking the time. It really means a lot for you to take the time. And like you said, we'll have to have you on to turn your lens on some of the issues of the day and talking about how to unpack stuff for people that are dealing with some of these challenges. So I really appreciate you taking the time.
Sure. Love to. Thank you very much for having me. I love being on your show. And to your listeners out there and listening to the podcast, I truly hope you get what you choose, and that you're thankful in advance for it, and see it as your reality. See it as your reality, and it will become your reality.
Thanks so much. I appreciate you. All right.